You're live.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. First order of business would be to call the roll for a quorum.
Yes, good morning, Chair Balducci,
Here.
Regent Santiago. Mute. He's here.
Here, I just couldn't get the mute undone. All right.
Thank you. Regent Stewart.
I'm here.
Regent Yang. Absence is noted. Welcome to our ex officio, Charlene Casamento and Chancellor Chang, our CFOs and staff on site. Oh, and I'm sorry, Chairman Gwen.
Present.
Thank you. Oh, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We have a quorum, and first order of business is to approve the previous finance meeting minutes from December 11th. I'd like a motion. I'll make a motion to approve them.
Second that.
Second from Mayor Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor. Second, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. The minutes are approved. We have two items, action items, and we have a couple of information items. In the order that they're listed, the first item is the 25 mid-year update, and the second item is the P-card policy. The mid-year update is going to take a bit of time because Lloyd's going to have to go through that in more details, and we'll have questions, I'm sure. So I'm going to reverse the number and do two first, which is the P cards, and then we'll take up the 25 mid-year update. So with that, we're going to move forward with, I'll make a motion that we discuss the P card policy. Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Second, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed?
All right.
Okay, yeah, I'll now take it up. And the P card policy is one of quite a bit of interest to members of the Finance Committee, and I'm sure to the board in general. There are well over 1,100 P cards out there, and that seems like an extraordinary amount. One of the things that's in the process of being done is cutting back that number significantly from where it is today. The other is that we've restricted or set a policy in place restricting the use of them. And after that was done, the chairman, myself, and Ted Yang sat down and redid or reworked the policy, making it even more strict than it was. What I'd like to do is turn it over to Karen to briefly tell you what the policy does and some of the more significant changes to it. So with that, Karen, would you please go ahead?
Yes, and I'd like to call on my colleague Cameron Liston to go through those first, and then I will add as appropriate.
I'm sorry, Cameron?
Thank you. I appreciate it. And Regents, I appreciate your time today and for all the feedback we received on the draft we sent over. I'm just going to go over some of the highlights of this, what's new from what we have in place right now. And I'm going to start off with the big change. The big change is we don't currently have a system-wide P card policy in place. We have individual P card manuals at institutions that vary greatly and aren't uniformly published or widely available to cardholders or to the board in terms of reviewing, what the standards are in place there. What this policy does, and really I think it's the only appropriate structure for a system like this, is it sets system-wide acceptable and prohibited uses, maximum limits, system and institutional level reviews and audits, and requires institutions to adopt and publish a set of procedures, which include audit standards, eligibility criteria, approval and reconciliation process, and violation response. Another really big change in this policy is that there is an explicit mandate to limit P cards. So the issuance of P cards must be consistent with the criteria that is going to be established and published. And that criteria also must apply to P cards that exist now, right? So in an active effort to reduce that number that exists at this moment, those eligibility criteria will apply to all existing P cards. Also, the policy establishes user types or requires that user types are established so that we can develop more restrictive limits for users based on their roles, based on their historical use, and that will have at least 3 tiers. I imagine that's probably going to get a little more granular as we delve into the use. That will have at least 3 tiers with restrictions beyond the maximum limits that are outlined in the policy. Another change is that there are no unilateral exceptions to any of the restrictions in the policy. All exceptions to the policy, including limits on purchases, single purchases, monthly purchases, number of purchases, or any prohibited purchases, cannot be unilaterally exempted by anyone. All must go through someone other than the person who is making the purchase. And the policy outlines who the authorized users are to make that kind of secondary approval prior to purchase. Also importantly, any exceptions must be documented. So there is no just, hey, is this okay? Get a yes and move forward. It must be documented to be in line with the overarching goal of the policy, which is that all P-card use has a legitimate, justified business need that furthers the mission of the institution. So with that, I will hand it over to questions, answer anything you have, but that is the kind of big picture of what we're doing here. We are establishing a system-wide level of expectation that is enforceable for the first time, which is, I think, a great step forward.
Thank you for that. Yes,
I'd
Karen?
like to add a couple of items to that.
Yes,
The policy requires mandatory training in order to have and be a card holder or a department user. In addition, it also increases or clarifies what the penalties are for misuse of the P card from as low as you no longer get to use a P card to requiring an individual to reimburse for purchases that were outside of the policy. Not counting any other disciplinary action that may result.
thank you. Any other comments by members of the committee? I think it's pretty well done. We had sat and discussed, and we think we've tightened it up. You know, you may be able to tighten it even more, but where we are right now is a long way from where we've been. And I'd like to move this forward to the full board for its explanation and so it can be implemented by us as we move forward. Any comments by anybody or here?
I would like to, Mr. Chair, I'd like to just comment on 2 things. One is appreciate the hard work, Cameron and Karen and team. Clearly you work with the, the legal area, the finance area, the operating area of the business. That's much appreciated. I would ask that you come back in 6 months. We're going to learn a lot what's happened, and we may want to, so to say, take this to the next level and see where we can do better, where we can be faster, where we can be more compliant. The second thing I would ask of you is to come back to the next finance committee meeting with other areas of policy opportunity. If purchasing cards was an area where we had a gap, there may be other gaps in delegation of authority or in approvals or approval methods or methodologies. So I'll leave it up to you to come back to us what that looks like and give some recommendations for us as we implement this. I am sure there's other areas within the system where we should check and recheck to make sure we have policies. If we don't, we should review them all, but come back to us with recommendations in those areas. And those could be everything from operating expense, capital expense, leasing, and other areas, all the things, out of cycle merit increases. There's a whole lot of things that need policy, right? So please come back to our next meeting with what's on your agenda.
Thank you. Any other comments before we vote this?
Charlene has her hand up.
Charlene, I'm sorry, you can't. Oh,
Right, not a problem. So having worked on a campus, so first of all, I'll start with, I'm super excited to see the system put in place, a policy, even though campuses may have had policies having a consistent method. It looks like the implementation date is April 1st of 25. And since some of these elements are different than what and I'll use Central as an example. We had a policy. Some of the items in this policy may be different. And so when we say effective April 1st and we're requiring training, will there be someone putting a training together that will be able to be orchestrated before April 1st? Or are you providing a window of time so that the institutions would have time to comply with the policy and make sure that their cardholders have been properly trained? So my question is really less about the policy and the nature of the policy, but just trying to understand what it's like for a campus to implement the policy, because we want to make sure that people can comply with the policy. So I guess two parts. Is there going to be a centralized training that institutions can use? And is there a due date to have people trained? And if it's April 1st, is that a realistic goal for the campuses?
That's a great question. I'm happy to take it if that's okay.
Please.
Yes, so there will be a system office training that will be available by April 1st that will cover the general use requirements in the policy. I do imagine that institutions will want to develop additional training consistent with the procedures that they're adopting. You'll notice that it does not have a date that is required by, because we thought it was most important to get these standards in place and effective as soon as possible. So there is a bit of a window. Of course, training can't be developed until it's approved by the board. So we know what we're training on, but the system office itself will have at least the initial training available by April 1st.
Thank you, Cameron. Ari?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was having a little bit of audio trouble earlier, so excuse me if this was a repeat. But I just wanted to understand two questions. One is around the view of the number of P cards and the efforts being undertaken to get that under control. And secondarily, what is going to be the practice to validate that these new policies are being adhered to, both in the near term when they're new, but over time, to make sure that we don't have the type of lapses that we had previously.
Cameron, do you respond to that too?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one as well. So I think I'll start with the latter, because I think that kind of measuring the success of this policy is really central to the policy, and it starts with having to publish these procedure documents. Right now, the procedures are out there and they exist, but they don't have a lot of oversight because they're not uniformly published. So the policy actually requires that as institutions are adopting these procedures, that they are submitted to the system office to be reviewed for consistency with the policy itself. And then after that, they will be published and widely available to anybody who needs to take a look at them. So that's the first way, right? So we're going to have a transparency related to the procedures that are being adopted. The second is, and a lot of this actually kind of funnels into our transition to the new P card system. So the new P card system is digitized. So our record keeping is not going to be in different Teams folders or paper trails or things like that, like it is right now. And that actually has two levels of checks built into it. So institutions themselves are going to have oversight over all PE card use at their institution, and the system office, as the parent account for the P cards, has insight into each institution's P card use. And the policy itself requires audits at both levels.
Can you just expand just very briefly on like what that audit looks like from a frequency? Because I did notice that the different institutions have to publish, their policies, and I noticed there are some reporting requirements, as well as, for example, requirements that if sales tax is charged, people have to take efforts to get those reimbursed. I did notice that, but I'm more curious about how are we validating that those things are actually being done versus just that we know the policies are published and everyone sees them. That's great, but the adherence to the policies and its efficacy is my concern.
Yeah, so those will also be published. So the actual audit procedures, which I think we require, how often it's happening, the criteria upon which folks are being selected for the audit and then the outcome of the audit. The important piece of that is anytime, no matter what the level is of a potential violation occurs, it must be reported to both the individual cardholder, so they're aware of the mistake that was made, and their supervisor. And the policy highlights or clarifies that what that means is for presidents, that's the chancellor, and for the chancellor, that's the Board of Regents. So anytime that there is a violation that is uncovered through the audit process, it is reported to the appropriate supervising authority.
Karen, did you want to comment also?
Yes, to your question, Regent Santiago, about the reduction in the number of P cards. In the first cut, as we transition to the new system, we have reduced the cards up by somewhere between 18 and 20%, and that's just the first. So we are now under 1,000 cards, and we are going to continue to work to reduce that number in conjunction with the institutions and understanding their needs.
And over what period of time are we thinking that that's going to happen? And do we have a target of the reductions?
I don't. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, please.
I don't think we have a good enough handle on the individual operations of the institutions yet, and we need to do that in consultation with them. But I think the 6-month checkpoint is a pretty good target for the next report on those reduction efforts.
Got it. And if I could just circle back to the question on the audits, the utilization audits, is that also something that we're going to have some visibility, into at a, look, I don't think we need to be looking at individual violations necessarily, Cameron, but some level of report out so that we understand, how that's being managed on a go-forward basis?
Absolutely, more than happy to share that however you all decide is most valuable to you. If you want to pick a time frame that you want to see, number of violations that are occurring, what the responses are, we will have all of that information available.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
I just have something to add to Ari's point. So when a new policy, when a new policy is implemented, it's natural for there to be a higher level of violations as people start to understand the policy. So I would recommend, if possible, to take like monthly linear data so that, and by institution, and obviously the institution should have a deeper level of data, but so that it's easy to see progress a little bit over time, right? So I would expect fewer violations in month 3 than in month 1, because in month 1 it's going to be completely new, and there'll be a little bit of growing pains probably to implement a new policy. Whereas if you just accumulate the 6 months, it may not reflect the hard work of the institutions and their progress to over time reducing the number of violations and making sure checks and balances are in place.
Well, that's a good comment, except this wouldn't take effect until April 1st.
Understood. But after April 1st.
And everybody has, and I'm not disagreeing, by the way, but I'm thinking everybody that has a P card ought to at least read what the new policy is. So I'm hoping that in month 1, the mistakes, as you said, may be more than in month 5, that there aren't that kind of mistake, because you have a responsibility to the use of that P card, and reading the policy that goes with it, I think is absolutely important. But I understand where you're coming from.
Thank you. Yes, I expect that there should be no violations, but recognizing that there could be growing pains, appreciating that over time would be helpful.
Regent Casamento, I want to respond to that because I think those comments are very fair. And I think, we want to solve for 2 things here. If the policy is correct, the first is adoption, and the second is the follow-up to Regent Santiago's point, the appropriateness. Are we really hitting the target and ultimately hitting the bullseye here? But I think, what's going to happen is we're going to look at this. The team here is going to look at it closely to see those things. Now, we are implementing a piece of industry standard software to manage this moment, and we can get best practices for like-size institutions for, let's call it things out of scope or percent of expenses that weren't followed up on. I know no world is 100%, but we want to be at least equal to or better than the industry norm. And we should know what those are and try to manage above those, right? And I'll let that, Cameron to follow up with Karen on those types of things, because that's all about execution.
Well, what is the, because there's just one other, well, maybe not one more, but I'll ask a question again anyway. How far of a change is this policy from sort of what's currently out there in terms of the limits and the expectations of what's currently set? Do we have a sense of the gap between the patchwork of policies today and this new policy?
Go ahead, Karen.
The P card program overall is held by the state comptroller's office. And so the limits on the cards that you see in the policy is the maximum limits are set statewide, is my understanding. In terms of the stricter limits, the new system allows us to individually manage each cardholder's card and set limits, and also purchasing categories, if you will. So facilities would obviously be purchasing differently than just an administrative office or versus student activities. So it allows us to customize that a little bit more. But this policy is stricter than the state policy overall for P cards.
Yeah, I think I understood that. Well, I appreciate that. I guess I didn't fully appreciate it before, but I guess what I'm more asking is the gap between how people think they should be using their P cards today in the CSCU system and what this new policy is.
Yeah, and I think that there were two issues, with the current setup. The first of which being that it was inconsistent between the institutions, and that the institutions had various levels of how much they were actually sharing these expectations with cardholders. So the fix for that is obviously having this centralized P card policy in place, with the other Board of Regents policies and the subsequent training that comes out with it. I think that was one of the biggest gaps. You'll notice, in the external reviews that we just went through, they were able to identify policy violations because there were actual standards in place. But people's understanding of those standards varied widely. The second is there was not any established regular reviews, right? So we may have an approver who would catch issues from time to time, but there was nothing outside of that where there were reviews to check to make sure we were using proper documentation, that there wasn't any inappropriate use happening, and then there was no required reporting out of those violations. So you saw somebody could make a mistake and then may make that exact same mistake for a 2-year period, because there wasn't any of that feedback loop that required them to be aware of their violations and that their violations were being tracked. So I'd say those are the two biggest changes in this. Obviously, all of the other ones are there as well.
So repeating back, Cameron, in summary,
Yep.
Better training and more real-time oversight is the true implementation of change here.
Yeah, I think people have to know what the expectations are so that we can hold them to that standard, and that was not occurring at a level that we would have wanted.
Got it. That makes sense. Just lastly, with the ability of the different institutions to sort of augment these policies with their own policies, do you foresee that in a handful of years we'll be back to a patchwork of sprawling policies that are disconnected from each other, kind of reverting us back to the same situation we're getting out of right now?
I do not, because institutions do not have the authority to adopt policy. Anything that they would adopt would be a procedure that is consistent with the policy. So we're separating out expectations from operational implementation. Operational implementation is going to be different at the institutions because they don't all have the same leadership structure. They don't all have the same, even people who are in charge of the P card administration, right? It's in different areas of the institution. So we will always have variations in implementation. However, given that they must be published and they must be reviewed to be consistent with the policy, I do not foresee us deviating from the central standards in the policy unless there are policy updates approved by the Board of Regents.
And when we, Cameron, when we promulgate the policy, we train people to the policy, we set the date for the policy compliance. Do we have our employees sign off that they've understood the rules, they've been trained on the rules, and that they will adhere to the rules?
Yes, we absolutely should. So that the policy is not as granular to say how institutions must track the training, but they must ensure that the training takes place.
We want to manage this from in some ways from us to the employees, and some other ways from the employees back to us. So if they can confirm that they've received the training, because maybe some manager said, yeah, we did the training, and the employee said, I never got the training, and we're trying to figure out that moment. But we need to make the employee accountable back to us, and we're accountable to the employee to give them all the right training, all the right information, all the right support to be effective users of the P card. So good feedback loop to make sure that people confirm that we've done what we said we would do also.
Yeah, and so how we handle that in the policy is for the general responsibilities, we actually have a responsibility for the cardholder to take the training, and then we have a responsibility for the institution to provide that training. So it is a responsibility of both parties to ensure that that training is taking place and that it's tracked.
Let's just have everyone who's responsible for the card agree they've received training. That's my clear point here. Because, yeah, because somebody could have said, yeah, everyone went through training, but employees, you know, Smith and Jones they weren't there, and all of a sudden they've misused the card and they're in hot water. And I think we have to get people to sign off on understanding the policy and procedure.
That makes sense. It goes back to
Ari's point.
yes.
And would it be inappropriate to say that there's a date upon which, if the employee hasn't signed off on the training, that their card's deactivated?
I think absolutely.
I mean, you know, we don't issue. I mean, we're obviously too late for this now, but you know, thinking about my personal experience, you don't get a card until you've taken and signed off on the policy. Obviously, when you're changing it, you got to do it in reverse. But if that's something we can implement, I think that really, you know, I take Marty's comment really well. It's responsibility in both directions, and it just can't go on forever. You know, we can't be in December talking about, oh, someone made a mistake because they didn't take the training. So. You know, if we could do that, I think that'd be a helpful addition to this process.
I agree. Thank you, Ari, for that. Other comments? If not, I would ask Rachel, would you call the roll?
We have quorum. We can take the vote.
You just need to call for the vote. Unless somebody decides they're voting against it, and
You just can't be fast on the.
I just can't be as
You
quick
just
as I
can't be
usually.
as quick as you usually are.
Okay. I'll just call for a vote. Then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Okay, the ayes have it. Motion's adopted. Thank you.
And we have that ad in there on the sign off, right?
Yes.
Chairman Balducci, can we put something on an agenda for the subsequent meetings to get follow-up report out on the implementation of the policy, both in terms of where we stand on training and sign off, and some level of report out on an audit down the line? I don't know. We got to look at all the timings on that, but I don't know if Pam wants to own that, but I'd like to sort of have that sort of pre-task so that we don't lose track of what's going on here.
We can't put it on today's agenda, but
No.
we can
Yeah, probably board agenda.
on the board agenda.
And I am tracking this item for follow-up finance committee and audit committee meetings, as well as an update to the full board at the next meeting.
Good.
All over it, Pam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Pam. Okay, moving on to the next item, next action item we have. Pam, do you have another comment?
Pam's just waving.
Oh, I think she's.
And lower.
She's just. Okay, the second item we're looking to today to discuss is the mid-year update for 2025 fiscal year. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Blanchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the slides come up on the screen, I just want to remind the committee that the mid-year update is designed to show what our projections are relative to the beginning of the year when you pass the spending plan for FY25. So this also will be consistent with the accountability report that the board also called for. So you'll see the accountability report in your package. You will also see the staff report and the normal budget schedules that we publish for at the beginning of the year and at mid-year. So I'll walk through the mid-year updates here, slide by slide, institution by institution. Next slide, please. So what you see on the slide, oh, I can barely read that. Can I share your notes?
Yep. You may.
Sorry, I'm a little blind. So the first slide here shows our spending system-wide. And what you will see are revenues that were originally projected at $1.219 billion. Those revenues are now higher by $37 million, now projected to be $1.257 billion, or $1.257 billion. That's a 3.1% increase. That $37 million increase is largely the result of increased enrollments in the fall. We are very excited to report that in the spring, the semester we're in now, we also find a 6% increase spring to spring in enrollment. So we are very excited to see the extra enrollments because that creates extra revenue. System-wide, our expenditures are down by $3 million. So the increase in revenues of $37 million and coupled with the decrease in expenditures of $3 million lead to a swing of $40 million. Originally, at the beginning of the year, we projected a $3.9 million surplus. Now, we are projecting a $44 million surplus. These surpluses are largely because we've started the year on a expenditure reduction framework or mitigation plan, and then we get these new enrollments. We're certainly excited about the new enrollments and the revenues they deliver, but the increases in revenues and the decreases in expenditure are what create larger surpluses. Next slide, please. Now, I should also say that each of these slides starts with the FY25 budget, again, that you approved on, right before July 1 for the FY25 spending plan. The state provided the system with the RSA funds of about $14 million, you may recall. And those dollars were applied into the mid-year. Some of my CFOs wanted to see those RSA dollars at the beginning in the FY25 column, but we wanted to make sure that the FY25 column is consistent with what the board approved back in June. So you will see some slides that show starting surpluses or starting deficits that may not be reflective of the true starting point after we provided the RSA, which is the CBAC increases for FY24. So this slide shows Central Connecticut State's mid-year update, and it starts with revenues for Central are up by $6.2 million. The expenditures are up by $2.4 million. So with more additional revenues than
I think we lost audio. Pam, do you hear
Yeah.
them?
I can hear you. I cannot hear
Yeah.
the room. I'm gonna get.
Okay, I don't hear the
I'm
room
gonna get
either.
fed. Hold on, please. I'm gonna put something in the chat.
We had some IT issues yesterday with internet here. The wind knocked out the power yesterday.
And a $3.8 million increase from their original expenditure projections. So while Eastern originally
Excuse me,
projected a balanced budget, they continue to
excuse me,
project a balanced
CFO
budget.
Blanchard?
So in terms of the net result, there's no change for Eastern.
CFO
They
Blanchard,
project to balance their budget.
CFO Blanchard, we lost audio during your.
Next slide is for Southern Connecticut State University. And you will see with Southern
I don't think
that
they can
their
hear us.
revenues are up $2.2 million and their expenditures are up $2 million. So they are projecting a small increase in their net results. That is, they originally projected a balanced budget for FY25. Now they are projecting a very small surplus of about $156,000.
Excuse me, we're having audio problems on YouTube. And your participants attending virtually cannot hear you. Audio stopped at Central, and I'm calling Ben right now. So we might need to go back and do Central again. So
Can you guys,
Thanks to that, Pam.
can you guys hear us now?
audio here? Okay.
A cup of coffee. You want something?
Yeah.
Get some black coffee?
So that we use that cup. Thank you.
Well, we've been.
We've got. Let me know when I can begin.
Okay.
Are we live?
We're not on YouTube.
We're not on YouTube.
Drop.
All right, so we have some regions, we are experiencing some technical difficulties in our YouTube presentation and recording. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so give us just a couple of minutes so that we can correct the problem, and then we'll restart the presentation starting at Central Connecticut State. So please bear with us.
Thank you. We've done a diagnostic. It appears we are back online. Can I verify from my virtual participants that they can hear me and hear the room? Regent Santiago? Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you and could hear the room.
Okay, excellent. Okay, we're going to just do one more double check. Hold on, please.
Yeah.
We haven't quite mastered it.
Get on a plane and you have your.
And YouTube is hearing us as well. So you may begin again.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you for your patience, Regents. We will continue with our presentation, going back to Central Connecticut State University. Again, Central's net position is improving from a good starting place. Their revenues are up $6.2 million, and their expenditures are only up $2.4 million. So their surplus, their projected surplus, will increase from $6.1 million to 9.9, almost $10 million. Next slide, please. For Eastern Connecticut State University, their revenues and expenditures are up by $3.8 million. So while they originally projected a balanced budget, they continue to project a balanced budget. So there's no change in their net result. Next slide, please. For Southern Connecticut State University, they saw revenues increase by $2.2 million and expenditures increase by $2 million. So their projected result was originally projected to be a balanced budget, but they are now projecting a very small surplus of $156,000, which is virtually balanced. So very pleased to see the effects of the increased enrollments that have a very positive effect on revenues, but sometimes expenditures, because with more students come more costs. Next slide. Western Connecticut State University is having a good year as well. Their revenues are up $700,000 and their expenditures are down by $1 million. So we are excited to report that while Western originally projected a balanced budget. They are now projecting a surplus of $1.7 million. A surplus that will be very helpful as they move into the biennium. So next slide, please. With Connecticut State Community College, they're having a very good year with revenues, which are up $23.5 million. So while they originally projected revenues of $442 million, they are now projecting revenues of $466 million. You will see, and I should have covered this with the other institutions. You'll see that I've collapsed the revenue items into student revenue and state support and other. Student revenue is tuition and fees, and for the universities, that includes room and board. For CT State, the student revenue is mainly tuition and fees. State support is state support, obviously. Other really amounts to interest on our cash holdings minus contra revenues or expected non-payments. So with CT State, while their revenues are up by $23.5 million, their expenditures are down by $9.3 million. So similar to the story that I told system-wide, with a large increase in revenues and a relatively large decrease in expenditures, you're going to face a very large swing in your projected results. So with CT State, their approved spending plan showed a deficit of $2.2 million. Again, this is without the RSA. The RSA is shown in the mid-year column. So with the RSA and the improvements in their operations, CT State is now projecting a $30 million surplus. That's a $32.8 million swing because of the positive results on the revenue side, as well as the mitigation they continue to implement on the expenditure side. Next slide, please. Just click it. Just click the thing.
Okay.
So now we're showing the update for Charter Oak State College. Charter Oak State College originally projected a balanced budget on $22.6 million in spending, but they are not projecting new revenues, but they are projecting $1.7 million reduction in their expenditures. So that reduction in expenditures will lead to a $1.7 million surplus for Charter Oak. Again, you can see the categories of expenditures and revenues that are collapsed. But if you look at the accountability report or the detailed schedules that we provided you in your packets, you will see more detail in terms of the student revenue, in terms of the tuition, fees, as well as the various categories of state support, some of which are block grant, some of which come in the form of block grants, and some of which come in the form of one-time funds, which of course will be going away for the biennium, and we'll discuss that in our next presentation. Next slide. And finally, System Office and Shared Services. We are projecting a $1.1 million increase in our revenues. So our revenue projection is now at $33 million, but our expenditures are also going up, but by about $800,000. So we're projecting, while we were projecting a balanced budget at the beginning of the year, we're projecting a very small increase in our net result of a $302,000 surplus. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report. I'm happy to take questions from the regents.
And that's where we are in midterm. Okay, questions from members of the committee? I can't see who's.
No, we'll probably go back to slide versus slide. So I see it.
Sorry?
Yep. I just wanted to confirm going through all this that all of the increase is in either revenue, or it sounds like maybe either better returns on interest or improved payment collections, et cetera, and then, and then expenditures being down. And so the overall improvement in budget is not relying on any one-time revenue use of reserves or anything like that. This is all just improvements in operations. Is that an accurate summary?
That is an accurate summary, Ari. We're not considering the use of reserves in FY '25. We will talk about that as we talk about the biennium. But these results, these improvements in FY '25 have almost everything to do with increased enrollments. And so the revenues system-wide of additional revenues of $37 million reflects the additional enrollments that we have. There's some improvements in terms of the interest on our cash being held by the state, but most of it is improved enrollments.
So to reiterate the point I think that I'm hearing from you, Lloyd, is that as we attract and retain more students and educate them in our system, our financial outlook gets significantly better.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So if we could,
comment, by the way, Ari, if I might, attract is one thing. The retain, to me, is very important in the process. You bring somebody in September, you pick up tuition there, and after the holidays, they're gone, they don't sign up. That's a negative. That's not a positive thing. So we have to work on both ends of your comments, Ari. One, getting students in, and then two, retaining them so that they continue to pay tuition and fees and that they continue on with their education at our facilities.
100% couldn't agree with you more. If they come but don't like what they're seeing and leave, we actually created more problems for ourselves. But attracting and retaining student population is absolutely crucial. These positive numbers really demonstrate that. I just wanted to reiterate and bring up that point and hope there'll be an opportunity to do the same in the full board meeting. We need to be out there making sure that we understand who we can serve, telling them what we do, and showing them how great things can be. So very happy to see this. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Santiago. I will point out on this particular slide, which shows spending and revenue system-wide, I will direct your attention to the expenditure section, and in particular, the personnel line. You'll see that we originally planned at the beginning of the year to spend $860 million on personnel. That's salaries and fringe costs. But now we're projecting to spend $17 million less on personnel. So the story that we're telling, in addition to the increased enrollments that produce the increased revenue, is that we're also becoming more efficient by reducing our spending and serving more students with fewer personnel.
Just a quick question. Is there an opportunity to sort of talk through, looks like the biggest increase, at least from a percentage perspective, is in the other bucket. And I think you had referenced, it's a smaller number though on a percentage basis.
Yeah, the other revenue, as I said, it's mostly interest and some other small auxiliary items. The increase is just less than $3 million.
Got it. Thank you.
So we're very excited about what this portends for at least the near term with these increases in student enrollments. And we'll talk more about how that will impact our projections for the biennium. Other questions on the FY '25 update? There may be other questions that I can't see their hands for.
I can't see.
CFO Blanchard, this is Charlene Casamento. I have two questions, if I may.
Sure.
So first of all, congratulations on the increased revenue. If I'm recalling how the process works with the mid-year update, it generally reflects the actuals related to the falls, which may have been, may inform the spring a little bit. As you have shared, there is an increase in enrollment in the spring, and that's an actual number. I know that it's probably too late to reflect them in here, but would it be possible for you to create some kind of simple way of us appreciating is that how does that increased enrollment, how much revenue, additional revenue is created by the difference between the enrollment that is part of this mid-year projection and what you actually have, how much more does it move the needle off that $12 million number? I think that would be a helpful piece of information. So that's one. The second is you made a reference to the accountability report. Is that a separate document that Regents access somewhere else? If you could, and I apologize if I have it and I don't know it, if you could direct me where to find it, I would really appreciate that.
Yes, thank you, Regent Casamento, for your question. If you look at your packet, I'm getting some help here. So in your packet, the accountability report starts on page 54. And the accountability report was called for by the board about a year ago so that they can get something akin to a quarterly report. What we did was we had to make sure the board understood that quarterly doesn't really help us in higher ed, because the first report would be very similar to the second report, because they would both only capture, the first report would only capture the fall numbers, and we wouldn't have the spring numbers until mid-February. So the first two reports would have been the same if we were to do them on a quarterly basis. So we're doing three accountability reports, one in the fall, after we know what the fall census numbers are, and then one now for the mid-year. Unfortunately, we could push this back in order to incorporate the actual spring numbers, Regent Casamento, but we wanted to schedule it early enough to actually reflect the mid-year numbers. And then later in the spring, closer to the summer, in May, we will present an accountability report that will show the spring numbers as well. As it relates to your first question, Regent Casamento, can you repeat the first question? I didn't quite track you on that.
Sure. So the information you've just presented assumes something about the spring enrollment and the corresponding revenue with that spring enrollment. It sounds like you've achieved better than planned or expected enrollment, which would suggest that you would have better than expected revenue. I'm requesting by institution, and I guess to the extent that the system office is impacted, just an understanding of, based on the actual numbers of students that you have for the spring, how much more revenue does that generate for the system? And again, I don't think all your reports need to be restated. Something that possibly could happen in a simple spreadsheet. So if that additional revenue generated an additional 10 million above and beyond the surplus that's now projected, I think that would be helpful information for the regents and also for the campuses to celebrate in terms of the progress making that is happening in terms of balancing budgets.
Thank you for that. I think now I understand what you're asking for. We can certainly provide that. We have a projected census for the spring. We should have final census numbers in the next few days. We can certainly provide a supplementary report to the board that shows how those actual spring numbers affect our projections.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So other questions from the regents? I don't know if I'm seeing all the regents' hands.
I don't see any.
Wanna...
Okay.
Yeah, I see no additional hands up from our participants virtually.
Right. Well, that concludes my mid-year update, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I don't remember. Did I make a motion to accept for the resolution?
You'll need to seek a motion for approval of the mid-year.
Yeah, did I do that already? Okay. I would like to make a motion that we approve the mid-year update for 2025. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much. Made and seconded. I'll try your minds. All those in favor of accepting that update, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. The ayes have it, and it's the 25 mid-year update is adopted. Thank you very much for that.
Information.
Now we have two informational items. One I think will be of great interest. Matter of fact, both will be of great interest, one probably more than the other. The first one is the accountability report, which has been mentioned on and off over the course of this meeting, just briefly, and I'll turn that over to Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned during the mid-year update, the accountability report is exactly the same as the mid-year update. So I've shown you those numbers. It reflects both the numbers in the detailed schedules that are included in your packet, starting on page 7. And it also includes the accountability report. As I said earlier, it starts on page 54 of your packet. So I will move on to the next item, the next informational item, which is the FY 26-27 biennium budget summary. As the slides go up on your screen, yesterday, the Chancellor sat in front of the Appropriations Committee. And this is the presentation that was provided to the Appropriations Committee. We didn't walk through the slides. We mainly addressed the Appropriations Committee questions. But we wanted to share with you basically the budgetary slides that were in this presentation. If you're interested in the full presentation, I believe Vice Chancellor Joseph sent those out to the board yesterday. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. So this presentation that I'm showing you now will be a subset of that larger presentation that was just sent to you yesterday. So next slide. The important story we wanted to tell the state and the Appropriations Committee was that we wanted to make sure they understood the very strong mitigation efforts that we have been undertaking over the last 2 years and that we plan to undertake during the biennium. You'll see that with this current biennium, FY24 and FY25, we are in the middle of $167 million worth of mitigation. That mitigation includes $64 million of expenditure reductions. And now we're planning going forward for the biennium, FY26 and FY27, about $95 million of mitigation in each year. That adds up to $190 million of mitigation that we are planning for the coming biennium, showing the state and the taxpayers that we are being as prudent with taxpayer funds as we know how. That $95 million of mitigation in 26 will include $40 million worth of expenditure reduction. And the $95 million in 27 will include $37 million of expenditure reductions. Now, you're probably wondering how we can have twice the mitigation effort relative to expenditures. This is the time when we are planning some use of reserves, and I'll walk you through some of that with subsequent slides. Next slide. So this is the governor's proposed budget. This is in the governor's budget. You'll see that we're showing 3 sort of sections. One section is FY25, and I'll walk you through that here in just a minute. The other section includes the governor's proposals for FY26 and FY27. And then the last 2 rows show the change from FY25. So FY25, the rows there show the original block grant. If you look all the way to the right in the red boxes, you'll see that the block grants we received last year or the current year.
Frank.
I'm sorry, was
Hey, where are you?
Somebody is talking. Can you mute your microphone, please?
Oh, nice.
Sorry.
All right, Regent Santiago, can you mute your microphone? Thank you. All right, so the block grant we received this year amounted to $411 million. And then we got RSA. RSA is used to support wage increases of $14.4 million. Of course, OPM and the governor have authority to rescind funds appropriated by the legislature. And so they chose to rescind or hold back rather $4.4 million, which is certainly within their authority. And we received about $185 billion in one-time funds. These one-time funds include PAC funds of about $28.5 billion, well, plus the 5.7, so about $34 million. Carry forward funds and ARPA funds. Most of that 184 is about $156 billion worth of ARPA funds, which will go away in FY26. And I'll show you that in just a second. So the governor's proposal for the CSUs, CT State, and Charter Oak are shown on the slide. The governor is proposing $193 million for the universities, $234 million, $235 million for CT State, and $3.4 million for Charter Oak in FY26. And you'll see in FY27, the governor is proposing $198.7 million for the universities, $242 million for CT State, and $3.5 billion for Charter Oak. The governor's proposals represent increases to the block grants for the universities and the colleges. You'll see those increases of $9.6 million for the universities in 26, $11.7 million for CT State in 26, and about $100,000 for Charter Oak. And so, we're pleased with the increases in the block grants provided by the governor. Yet the negative numbers that you see at the bottom right of the slide still reflect the fact that those, that $156 million of ARPA funds are going away. So the difference between what we received in the current fiscal year of $606 million and what the governor is proposing still is quite large, over $100 million, about $130 million in 26 and $121 million in 27. Again, this is shown to you at the block grant level. We will show you what that looks like at the institutional level.
And like just the $40.8 million in other funds, where is that money coming from as opposed to the ARPA money, which I know we're losing?
Those are funds provided by the Appropriations Committee. They would be general fund dollars.
Okay.
For various purposes. The PAC funds will be in that number.
The PAC money is included.
That's correct, as well as some other developmental.
Thank you.
So Lloyd, if I could jump in, I guess I'm not sure I would classify the PACT funding as one-time funds. I believe at one point the PACT funds were one-time funds, but in the current biennium that we're in, it moved from being one-time funds to being permanent funds. So if you could take a second look at that, and certainly you could connect with our budget analyst here at OPM. But if a portion of that 40 million is PAC funding, from our perspective, we're using general fund appropriated dollars, and we don't see those as one time at all.
So thank you, Regent Casamento. I thought I was clear that these would be general fund dollars, but Vice Chancellor Joseph, please clarify.
Yeah, I think included in that number is the 5.7 million that was part of the expansion that the General Assembly approved last year of eligibility, right? And I think that number is included in there. So the eligibility of the program was expanded last year. And there's a difference in terms of what it now costs.
So let me provide a clarification after the fact in addressing Regent Casamento's comments, but I think your comments are fair. Previously, These one-time funds were used for these special initiatives. Currently, we understand that they will be general funds going forward. I'm sorry, you're muted, Regent Casamento.
Sorry about that. In the current year we're in, fiscal year 25, the PACT funds are not one-time funding, but rather permanent. And I see in your column you have other comma one-time funds. I would it may be worth separating that column to avoid confusion and only having one-time funds in that column. Because right now it sounds like the other might be the PAC program, and then there must be some amount of one-time funds that you're classifying as one-time.
So I think partially, yes, but when the PAC program was expanded by the General Assembly this past year, and there wasn't an increase to the to that fund, right? The system received $80 million for the current year in additional ARPA. That part of that additional ARPA funding was used to cover the increase in eligibility in PACT
For the current year.
for the current fiscal year.
Understood, but I believe that, and again, I don't have the numbers right in front of me. I believe that the appropriation included somewhere around 27 million of permanent funds. So again, I'm not really, what I'm asking for is that you go back, and to the extent that you've included permanent funds in that other column, the funding we've provided and that the legislature provided on a permanent basis, I wouldn't include that in a one-time column. That really is my point. Again, in the spirit of trying to have open conversations, I wouldn't want anyone to be confused that we're suggesting that the preponderance of the PAC program is funded with one-time funds, because that was fixed in the biennium that we're currently in.
Thank you, Regent Casamento. Very good suggestion. So again, this is the slide that shows what the governor proposed. Slide. This shows how the governor's proposal deviates from our request. So you will see the request campus by campus for 26, FY26, and for FY27. For each year in the biennium, we requested $555 million. And you see how they break down campus by campus. We're also requesting, because it was not included in the governor's budget, the restoration of the O'Neill chair for about $315,000. And we are seeking that expansion of PAC that was not in the governor's budget, meaning the 28.5 was in the governor's budget, as just mentioned, but the $5.7 million expansion was not in the governor's biennium budget, and we seek to have it restored as well. So you'll see the delta on the right-hand side in the red box, reflecting the fact that the governor provided $83.7 million less than what we sought in FY26, and $70 million less than what we sought in FY27. I'll stop there for questions. Regent Casamento, is your hand still up, or is this a new question?
My apologies, no questions. Thank you.
You're fine. Your questions are welcome. Are there other questions? Okay, next slide, please. So this slide shows how the governor's budget impacts our projected deficits. So now I'm showing this by block grant. So the universities are collapsed in the first column there under CSUs. The first row shows the projected deficit that we made it last summer. So as we began projecting out 26 and 27 this fall, rather, we were projecting deficits after our mitigation I showed you with the first slide in this presentation, of $30 million system-wide. And so with that $30 million deficit, I'll walk you through each line by line. because they will add or subtract from that starting point. With OPM's adjustments or the governor's adjustments to the block grant, it added $31.4 million, to our position. The governor's budget included $200,000 for the Ladders Initiative, which is an initiative for Charter Oak to encourage CT State students who want to pursue an online bachelor's degree to go to Charter Oak and do so. The next line reflects inflationary increases that we expect, both personnel increases as well as non-personnel increases. And we project those inflationary increases of about $32.8 million. And then with the restoration of the PAC expansion of $5.7 million and the restoration of the O'Neill Chair at Central Connecticut State University of $315 million, we are projecting a deficit system-wide for FY26 of $37.3 million. So you see that the starting point was 30. We are now projecting 37. That's a reflection of some additional costs and additional support for which we are grateful to the governor. In 27, we tell a similar story. We start with a projected deficit of $25.6 million. We add in the increases to the block grant proposed by the governor. We add in the Ladders Initiative expense, the expected inflationary expenses of $66.3 million, as well as the restoration of the PAC expansion and the O'Neill Chair. We project in FY27 a deficit of $52.8 million. So the $37.3 million and the $52.8 million is our request of the legislature.
Lloyd,
Yes, sir.
why does the inflation expectation double from 33 to 66?
Because they accumulate. So when I get a wage increase in
This
one
has to
year,
be mostly all wage.
that's right, mostly.
About 80% is wage.
That's right. So it's if we get a $30 million bill in FY26, that $30 million is an expense in FY27, plus the new increase in 27. Is that clear?
Yeah.
This is the accumulated effect of wage increases that.
This is Einstein compounding, right?
That's right. That's right. And this is really the largest impact on our budget, is the fact that we get wage increase, well, we get inflationary increases, and they are not fully covered by the state. Questions on this slide from the regions? All right, hearing none.
Lloyd, I have a question, and I'm sorry I couldn't get the hand up. So you just presented FY25 in a very favorable light. Granted, that includes some level of one-time support, but it also includes increased revenue and expenditure reduction. Do you have a sense, or are you working with the CFOs on the campuses to appreciate, and I'm just going to use 26 as an example. Right now, you're projecting $37 million shortfall. Is the original projection after deficit based on what you were thinking at the beginning of the year before enrollment outperformed the projections? Or has this been a number that is been adjusted to reflect improved revenue that was better than expected?
Thank you for that question, Regent Casamento. I believe these numbers reflect the mid-year update, but I want to have that confirmed by Valentina. Valentina, are you on the call?
You may be
Yes,
muted.
I am on the call. Those reflect the biennial budget, Lloyd, and everyone else. They have not been updated because we are comparing apples to apples. biennial budget submitted versus the governor's proposed based on our submission or what OPM recommended.
So let me ask you another question, Valentina. So the increases that we just showed in the mid-year, the increases in revenues, will they contribute to, the deficit, the surpluses that we showed in the mid-year? Will they contribute to an improved position of our projected deficits here?
Absolutely, but on the other hand, we have to consider all other things that were not in the biennial budget. Per OPM instructions, we have not included any CBAC increases in FY26 or FY27. So those increases we isolated underneath, but the deficits obviously will change. So we will have a better estimate of our projected deficits after we complete the 5-year, sustainability plans.
Thank you, Valentina. So Regent Casamento, this slide does not reflect what we showed in terms of the improvement in our FY25 position. So I believe you are right that these projected deficits in FY26 will improve, will be less based on the surpluses we project now for FY25. Is that clear?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that confirmation, and certainly excited to see more positive momentum on the enrollment front and the positive impact on the financials.
We are excited for that as well. Thank you. Next slide. So this is in our presentation that we presented to the Appropriations Committee, and it shows very clearly, but for the periods following the pandemic, where federal funds flowed, not just to us, but to all institutions across the country, the overall trend shows that we are reducing our spending. This slide shows that in FY19, the year before the pandemic, we were spending $1,247 million. We are now projecting for the next fiscal year to spend $1,144 million. That's $100 million less than what we were spending before the pandemic, with all of the ups and downs that we have experienced in enrollments and other costs. And so we feel like we are doing what the board is asking us to do by becoming more efficient. Now, part of becoming more efficient is to get better on the enrollment side that produces the revenue that will help us cover our costs. But our spending picture is reflecting the fact that we are becoming more efficient. The spike has a lot to do, the spike that you see in the expenditures line has a lot to do with the ARPA dollars we received for the pandemic, as well as increased wage increases for FY22 and FY23 of $63.5 million. Lump sum payments, if you recall, of $20 million. And the anomalous, every 10 years, we get this 27th payroll expense of about $25 million. So that spike that you see on the screen is very anomalous. The pattern that is most meaningful in this picture is the reduction of expenditures across our system that add up to almost 10% of our spending. Questions?
Those expenditures are primarily personnel.
That's correct. That's correct. Next slide, please. So many of you are interested in the efficiency of the system office itself. So if you look on the right-hand side, the graphs show the blue bars show what we consider to be system office employees, and the orange bars show what we consider to be shared services employees. So on the left-hand side, you'll see what we consider in this particular presentation to be system office employees. They include everyone here at the system office except for the finance and administrative part of our operations here at system office, which all fall under me. That includes some system office functions, but mostly shared services functions. So about 164 people report to me within the context of accounting, budgeting, facilities, human resources, information, technology, and procurement. So you'll see with the blue bars that we have reduced our number of administrators down to, what is that, number 34? Down to 34 people. The previous year, it's down by, what is it, 38? So down by 4 administrators, just among those offices in the system office, the chancellor's office, academic student affairs, and the like. The orange bars show originally some increases in shared services personnel, but we are now starting to reduce shared services personnel. And you'll see with the last 2 bars, in FY24, we had 186 personnel in shared services. And in FY25, we're showing 164, which means we've reduced the shared service personnel by 22 people only in the past year. So we are moving forward consistent with the previous slide that shows that we are reducing our expenditures. We are doing the same thing here at the system office to reduce the number of administrators we have and to reduce the number of personnel generally. Questions? Okay, next slide. This is another picture that emphasizes the staffing reductions. You'll see that before the pandemic, the first column, we had 11,689 employees. At the end of last year, we had 10,149 employees. That is about a 1,500 employee reduction over, since the beginning of the pandemic, since before the pandemic. So you'll see on the left-hand side of the slide how we reduced those positions. We reduced 200 full-time faculty positions over these few years, 922 part-time faculty positions. We've reduced 256 full-time staffers and 158 part-time staffers. So this is not falling on one class of employees or another class of employees, but we are reducing our expenditures in personnel across the board. Now, those reductions come with regular increases that we have to manage the budget against. But we are pleased to report that we are following the dictates of the governor and the board in reducing our overall spend. Slide, please. So I know this slide was not in the packet that we provided to the Appropriations Committee, but I wanted to show this slide because I know it is of interest to members.
Lloyd, sorry. Can I just chime in for 1 second and ask you to return to the previous slide? Because I want to make sure we make something clear to the board. Yesterday, when we were presenting to the Appropriations Committee, I would say we got some very stern and concerned feedback from several of the members on the Appropriations Committee about the reductions. We've made it very clear that we're trying to be, again, prudent, responsible, trying to evolve and become more efficient and streamlined, and trying not to hurt the student experience. But the legislators were very vocal and frankly, somewhat skeptical about our ability to do that. And so I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware of what the conversation was in Appropes and what I suspect might continue to be a conversation as the budget continues to be worked on, that yes, there is efficiency and there is, continuing to try to reduce and realign, but it certainly is not coming without a cost in certain areas that we are being asked to provide very explicit data on in the working group forthcoming. So I just wanted to make sure I stated that for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor. So we'll get back to the reserve slide. One of the consequences of, well, I won't say consequences, but results of reducing expenditures. And then in a time when you're finding yourself with additional revenues, well, the result of that two-pronged dynamic is to increase surpluses and therefore increase reserves. So what you see on the screen now is the current state of our reserves based on our FY24 audit. You will see that Central Connecticut State University right now has $118.7 million in unrestricted net position. 110 of those dollars are designated by policy. Eastern Connecticut State has $50 million worth of unrestricted net position, 47.8 being designated. Southern has $73.7 million in unrestricted funds, unrestricted net position rather, $50 million of that is designated. CT State has $235 million in unrestricted net position, most of which is undesignated, meaning most of which is available for use. You'll see the numbers for Charter Oak and for System Office. The big number for System Office, the $106 million, is the designated amount by policy that mostly is driven by our debt service requirement and our debt covenant requirement. One of the things that I've begun a conversation with the Chancellor and certain members of the, Regent Balducci, is the potential for using more reserves for particular initiatives. As these numbers grow, we will want to use them so that we are not stockpiling taxpayer funds. So you see that overall, for the system, at the end of FY24, we're sitting on $635 million worth of unrestricted net position, but $359 million of those dollars are designated to be set aside, and $276 million are available for use.
Do we have copies of these covenants?
We do have copies of the covenants.
Do you mind forwarding me the covenants just so
We
I
can do
understand
that.
what the
We can do that.
what the cash is correlated to? It must be correlated to some sort of a run rate or asset base or something, right?
We typically have a covenant of about 1.25, meaning if I make a payment of $30 million every year, I need to have 30.25 in the bank.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Basically, that's 1.25. Right now, we're looking at something north of 3x.
And these covenants are not banking covenants, they're more treasury covenants, right?
They're agreements. They're agreements with the debtor.
Who's the counterparty?
Loaner, the state, chief.
They're the counterparty, right?
Yeah.
The comment, the $360 million in designated funds, designated reserves. It's my understanding that we can change that number, not change the number, but change how much money goes into designated and how much goes into undesignated funds.
If we have a covenant, we need the counterparty to agree on the change.
Yes.
Right.
To the
But
extent
it can
that,
be done.
to the extent that it affects
The floor.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want to break the floor, or break the ceiling, whatever way you look at life.
Right. So we can change that where there's unrestricted
Yeah.
numbers or.
So you are correct, Chairman Balducci. The $359 million is set aside because of your policy. Not only can you change your policy, but you could change the allocation on a case-by-case basis, given what the board wants us to, how they want us to spend these funds.
We had to talk to the chairman about that, but okay, that's good. And we know we can change that.
Now, the second panel on this slide at the bottom that shows primary reserve ratio, this really answers the question, are these reserves too much or just right? It's hard to understand what's the right level of reserves. So we rely on industry standards to determine what the right level of reserves is. So the primary reserve ratio is simply the amount of reserves divided by your spending, your annual spending. And so if you look at only the undesignated and the available unrestricted net position, you'll see that for the universities, they range from 2% to 9%. That's far below an industry standard of 40% for the primary reserve ratio. Just so that you know, another benchmark that I don't really show on the screen, NECHI, our accrediting body for New England institutions, when they evaluate the financial condition of their member institutions, they will implement a warning if this primary reserve ratio falls below 0.25 or 25%.
Do they include endowments?
They do.
Okay. In
Well, not endowments per endowments, but certainly the
funds.
available funds, yeah. So to the extent that endowments are restricted. So that is a reflection, that is the measure of primary reserve if we only include the undesignated portion of our unrestricted net position. If you include all of the unrestricted net position, that last line at the bottom shows that most of our institutions meet or beat that benchmark. Central at 49% is just above the 40% benchmark, so they have just a little over the right amount of reserves. Eastern is at 39%, so they essentially are right at the 40% benchmark for reserves. Southern is at 29% using their entire unrestricted net position. It falls below the 40% mark, but is reasonably healthy and would not trigger would not trigger the financial model of NECHI. Western, their total net position is only unrestricted net position is only 12% of their spending. So that will trigger a warning in review at the accrediting body, as it has. CT State sits at around 47% of reserves divided by their spending. So they are just above the 40% benchmark. Charter Oak has a healthy amount relative to its spending, and System Office reflects a large amount, but that's because of the debt covenants that we've just discussed. But debt covenants.
But they're non-bank covenants of state.
That's correct. That's correct.
In the covenants with our banks, we're using our banks just as payroll pass-through. We're not hosting money in the banks if it's long-term capital. We're hosting at the state in the treasury, right?
In the STIF, that's right.
So we don't really have to worry about third-party bank covenants.
So system-wide, our total unrestricted net position is about 54% of our overall spending, which is a healthy amount of reserves relative to the 40% benchmark. So we have some room with our reserves to make some strategic investments. Questions? Regent Casamento.
Thank you, Lloyd. I appreciate this schedule. I think it would be helpful for the regions to see how this number has changed over time. So the 634 million, as I understand it, is an increase of $162 million over last year's numbers. And so, you have this kind of interesting situation where you have increased revenue and some reductions going on, but yet at the end of the day, the year ended with the unrestricted reserves going up by 164 million. If you were to go back to 2014 and compare that, if you were to go back to 2019, the reserves have grown by 418 million. So before the pandemic, there was a number. It was 191 million. And over the course of this tumultuous time with the pandemic, and a lot of the changes that have been happening, and the one-time support that's been provided, those reserves in total have grown by 418 million. And so I think I would agree it's important for reserves to happen. I'm not sure if these benchmarks here are titrated for a public institution that has some level of public support. But I think this conversation about how they've accumulated over time and looking back to understand a lot happened during fiscal year 24, but yet the year ended with a pretty healthy. In fact, if I look over time, since my records of 2012, 161 million increase is the highest ever that's ever happened. In fact, it surpasses some of the total values that existed back in 2015. So, I think your point that these funds, we could debate since management designates the UNP in the majority of cases, and places where we have restrictions. My understanding that the scarf that gets set aside when a bond sale happens, which wouldn't be part of unrestricted, but rather restricted funds, helps to satisfy the covenants in the bond sales. And again, that might have changed since the last bond sale that I was involved with at CSCU. So again, at the end of the day, management does have discretion to designate, and some of these designations are greater than the amount that existed even in the year before it. So I think looking at how things are being designated, what a proper fair amount is, and how, the $160 million, and again, we want reserves, but there were a lot of different things that happened last year, that I guess the question would be, did they need to happen in the way that they happened? So again, a lot to think about. I applaud you for surfacing this and getting the conversation going. But I think looking at the history and really showcasing, I mean, this is a pretty significant number. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Casamento. I have Chancellor.
Thank you. Charlene, you're right that we are. Well, first, I think it's understanding not just where we are, but how we got here. Right, the last 5 years they've been crazy, and they've been fluid, and we've had a black swan event followed by unprecedented amounts of federal support, and not to relive it, but we've done the best we can as a system and as institutions, and now here we are. I'll tell you two things. I wanted to just talk about the present and into the future. Present, as of yesterday, during approbes, we were very much, again, questioned and scrutinized when we broke down the fact that our biennium proposal includes a pretty sizable use of reserve funds, right, to try to come up with a balanced budget that still includes reductions of just under $40 million, proposed reductions of $40 million each year. Again, I think it was met with a healthy amount of skepticism and concern by the legislators as being unsustainable, and they have our reserve figures as just like we would have given them, and we'll continue to provide them to the board. The other thing I would just note is that we've been operating these past few years under our own kind of policies and kind of definitions of rules, right? As a constituent unit, and as Marty was saying and asking about, under which covenants are we functioning, right? I think the board, this is a great opportunity to look at some of those guidelines and policies that we've been functioning, because things have changed, right? And so if there is surplus that is under the system auspices right now, that is something that I've asked the team to thoroughly scrutinize and process, so that if there's the possibility of returning and utilizing such funds to the benefit of the campuses directly, that's something that we want to present options for the board. So, which is a very long-winded way of saying to you, Regent Casamento and this committee, that we're committed to continuing to scrutinize and understand and try to find balance. And the last thing we want to do is be viewed as holding on to money while we continue to ask for more money, right? Like, we want to make sure we have a healthy, appropriate, professional level of security in our reserves, which we will continue to utilize and spend down whenever we can, because that's what's going to be best for the students. So anyway, thanks for entertaining that very long and windy comment.
Thank you, Chancellor. And I will add to that by saying, while we are facing increasing enrollments recently, there are still projections out there that suggest that we face a demographic cliff in the out years, which is one of the reasons why the board chair called for the 5-year sustainability plans that we received from all institutions last night.
Yeah.
So we're pleased with that. But
I would say just a couple reflections. Pardon me, I didn't mean to interrupt. Thank you. When you have an enrollment increase of 4% and students are in school 2 to 4, 2 to 6 years, it's really a 1% increase. Because you got to track the life of there's people in there for multiple years, so we're not up 4%. We are up 4%, but
I understand.
It's a trickier number than we think. The other thing is, when the UMCHEM's report, inside of that report, outlines this situation, and Charlene, you spoke about the multi-year view and the climate reserves. They speak about it, they talk about it, they explained it, I thought, pretty well. For the layman, my interpretation of this is that we did something unintentionally good, which was those ARPA funds per se went into our reserves. I mean, you could say that they went out, but actually the reserves went up when the ARPA funds were coming in. So we actually have the ARPA funds to use. And I would say, and I haven't spoken to the board about this, nor the board chair, but if we're going to take money out of reserves, we may want to earmark them for investments instead of covering operating costs. The third point I'd make is, when we give guidance for a budget, do we give guidance for a profit? Or do we give guidance for a break even? And the reason I say this is that nonprofits can make a profit. They just can't disperse it outside the organization. Everything stays in the house. But sometimes, if we're going to be dealing with demographic cliff coming up, we don't know where it's going to get us or where it's not going to get us, and maybe it doesn't. If we say to everybody, you have to have, and Charlene, you've experienced in this, a 3% surplus, 4% surplus on your budget, that's a requirement. Then if you have a dip in enrollment or a second semester fall bigger than you think, you've got oxygen in your plan to break even. Right now, we have to have all things working. We've gone the other way where we have the surplus, and I saw that's great, the 37 million extra in revenue, and that's terrific, but we can't control all that stuff. So it's just building oxygen into the plans going forward as a way to, because break even, I always say with a break even plan, there's no room for breakage, because you're either going to be a sinner or a saint. No one comes on and finishes the year at zero. Nobody. Right? And I think Central did that, where they budgeted in this plan half the way through the year, 6 million, they're at 9 million, or they're at 3 million, they're at 6 million. That's probably the right kind of spirit. Maybe that's one of Charlene's legacies. I don't know.
I agree, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we do, our guidance really is for balanced budget, but certainly the CFOs at the institutions are prudent managers of their resources, right, and they try to set aside what they need.
I'd rather have them sandbag on the surplus line than sandbag on the expense line, because I think that's what happened 2 years ago. We had CT State come together, everyone presented balanced budgets, at least my read of it, they put the overage inside the expense line. The expense line came out real positive, and then we looked out of control. So I'd rather call the spade a spade and say, yeah, we're gonna have a surplus because we have to invest. We gotta do things with the extra money. It's okay to make a few extra dollars each year on this, right? Charlene?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, at least the practice that used to happen at Central is each year there was a contingency item built into the budget, a small amount to mitigate against risk. The president certainly made strategic, we made cuts in certain areas to be able to afford investments in other areas, which when you're looking at, a good example would be developing programs that help to ensure future financial sustainability. Using funds strategically so that we could be better positioned for the future is the perfect example of why a lot of the ARPA funds were provided, and an opportunity that may exist to leverage some of these resources, right? If we were to look across the labor market and what the students need, and be able to enhance or improve or develop the program offerings to meet that demand, these resources certainly become tools in the toolbox to help make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I get to this slide, I will just say that the Chairman Balducci and I had a good conversation yesterday about reserves, about the fund balance policy. There are some changes I would recommend in the fund balance policy. I think these are conversations that management should have with the board going forward, both in terms of revising that policy so that we are clear about the right level of designation and looking at the reserves and what reserves that might be beyond the reserves we set aside for sustainability purposes and see what's available for investment.
Yeah.
So we will continue that conversation. I think it'd be a fun conversation to have.
And Regent Casamento, I've been meaning to ask you this since our last meeting, but this would be appropriate time. We've got this allocated bond fund or unallocated bond fund on physical plant and capital that we'd like to create a source for our facilities. So I'd like to follow up with you and Chair Balducci to figure out how you can help us help everyone else.
And certainly at the Office of Policy and Management, we just met a group of us yesterday to start looking at the more recent request that was submitted in January. So I think we'll end up being in touch, the department that handles that, with maybe some additional requests for information. So I think a meeting would be welcomed so that we can see a path to the future.
Yeah, I'm sure the Chancellor and the CFO Blanchard will be more than happy to join us in that meeting, but we'd like to access those funds. So we appreciate you helping us.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Let me, this is my last slide. This is the last slide, right? Yep. Oops. So the final point that I want to make about all of the spending, and we can certainly have additional, continued conversations about reserves and spending and revenue. But the real impact here is on the state. Whatever is spent at CSEU in our institutions, it generates a large economic impact on the state. It generates $24 billion of economic impact across the state. So with, the whole idea about economic impact is with each dollar that enters the economy, that dollar churns. And so when I have a job and I pay my mortgage company and the employees spend those extra dollars, and the people where they spend their dollars. So there's a continuing effect with each dollar spent. We spend $1.2 billion a year. that generates these impacts in terms of our operations and the payroll that we make to our employees who spend in the economy, the contracts that we have with contractors who with more revenue, they hire more employees and they spend in the economy. The students themselves spend in the economy, and in particular, out-of-state students that come into our state to be educated by our institutions, spend money into the economy, and that has a greater impact, frankly, than in-state students. And finally, the over 2 million people that are our alumni who graduated from our institutions continue to have an impact in the economy as they stay, live, and work in Connecticut. So the impact of CSCU and our spending is tremendous and provides solid ROI. There are studies that have been done that show that the return on the investment in higher education is larger than most investments you can make on Wall Street, something north of 15%. I believe Professor Cunningham provided the board with a study that showed a 16% ROI in higher ed. So we want to speak more about not just spending and economic impact, but the return on the investment into CSCU, that return returns to the citizens of Connecticut. And we're very proud to provide that impact. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. And normally we would just make a motion to adjourn. However, since there's an information item, I think it's of more value that we at least take a moment to listen to, dealing with students' food security. Leslie, thank you very much for your patience. I think it's worthwhile at least bring it out. It's an information item. There is no vote to be taken, but I think it's of value for members of the committee, the board, and anybody else listening in as to what we're doing and trying to do and the importance of it. Leslie, would you go take a few minutes?
I'm sorry, Chairman. I think just Charlene has her hand up. I'm not sure if that's old or not, but her hand's up.
It was, and I just had a remark related to the return on investment. Thank you, Ari. I appreciate that. I see on the billboard and a lot of the communications related to the return on investment for CT State. I haven't seen in the social media ecosystem anything related to the universities, and Charter Oak for that matter. And so I love that the slide includes the whole look. So my only question was, is it coming that we're going to start to do that marketing for the rest of the system? And any update you can provide, and you don't need to, I certainly don't want to get in the way of the wonderful presentation that's coming on food insecurity. But at some point, if that could be responded to, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Let me just jump in real quick because I'm going to have to leave soon. But Charlene, it's a great point. We have been singing it loud and proud internally and with the legislature and so on and so forth. We're doing some really targeted communications that I think Adam could always speak to with the legislature. And Adam could also speak to you offline or anyone who's interested, just so we don't gum up the meeting on this. But Adam and his team have engaged a marketing firm. I think they did the marketing efforts last year did a pretty good job. I think this year, with Adam and his team fully formed, we're looking at something even sharper. But your point is well taken. We have to take this kind of good news and really run with it, and so and get it outside of our own bubble.
Thank you. With that, and thank you for that, Charlene, by the way, and we'll get that response and move forward. But now I'll turn to Leslie. Leslie, thank you, because I think this is well worthwhile for people.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity and your interest in non-academic barriers to student success. And that's what food insecurity is. I think it reflects your understanding that we have to approach retention with at least the same vigor that we approach enrollment, not just because it's a revenue imperative, but because that's really at the heart of the promise when they enroll with us. So I know you have received a comprehensive report.
Hey, Charlene, your hand's still up, by the way. Figured I'd mention that while we've got a gap in the technology
In
otherwise.
audio again. Hold on.
Yeah.
There seems to be some serious gusts of winds in Hartford, and when it does, the entire system blinks. So I wonder if it happened again.
I have questions about why wind causes internet outages in 2025.
I
But
know.
and what's odd is I'm in West Hartford, and I don't.
It happened twice yesterday, and it's happened
Yeah.
twice here this morning.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
We're back.
We're back.
Welcome back.
And so I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Have a wonderful. Sorry about that. I know you've been given the report. I want to make sure that you've heard my thanks to Jess and to Danny and to Tam for helping to put together this comprehensive report. It covers a variety of things, but I really want to highlight 4. First, we have some history as a system here. In 2019, we were given a grant by the Lumina Foundation to actually assess what we were doing in the area of non-academic barriers to student success, because they have long recognized that's the heart of the problem. And so we did that across institutions. Of course, the community colleges were separate at that time. And it won't surprise you, we focused on food, housing, transportation, childcare, and access to mental health services. I'm delighted to talk later on about what the system has done with regard to all of those 5 areas, but I want to focus on food insecurity now. When the chancellor was doing his town hall meetings when he first came on board, he recognized that a couple of our institutions had support from Stop and Shop. And so we reached out to Stop and Shop and said, hey, you're supporting a couple. They are a single corporation, so they have the whole state. They were thrilled at the idea of partnering with us as a system. We are seeing more and more that providers are not interested, funders are not interested in nibbling their way through pilots and hoping to have impact. They want impact at scale. And so Stop and Shop provided us with our first contribution, which really was a game changer for all of our institutions, and that was $100,000. Then the next year, they provided us with $133,000. And this year that we're currently in, we have $156,500 from them. For many of our campuses, we went from, in 2019, pet projects of faculty who were doing it on a volunteer basis to somebody dropping off something once a week. We now have pantries everywhere, including the satellites. And the pantries aren't just a place to get food, right? So to Regent Casamento's point about SNAP, they're a place to learn about community resources. So I wanted to really highlight the significance of Stop and Shop and also the other partnerships that we have leveraged as a system. So we approached 211. You can create an account on 211 if you don't know how to do it. Put in your zip code. You can find every place in your zip code where you can get a hot meal for free. You can find out who's got a food bank. You can find out which churches are giving out food. And the state has invested in keeping 211 up to date. So we have leveraged that. To date, they have trained at least 1,200 faculty, students, and staff across our system. For the Director of Mental Health and Wellness at CT State, she continues those trainings on an ongoing basis. Our students live in communities. They spend a little bit of time with us on campus, but we have to connect them to the community to have this make sense for them. We've also linked up with Food Share, not surprisingly, as Nantucket is a great example. Not only do they get fresh produce and fresh food, but they'll get a call because they're part of that network. Do you need a freezer? I think Three Rivers might have gotten a freezer that way. But so being part of that Food Share network brings in fresh, better food for our students on a more regular basis, but it also makes us part of a network that can be really valuable for the campuses. I wanted to mention Public Act 22101.
that requires us to do regular surveys of our students. Our campuses were already doing that. So you will see everything from online options to order to feminine hygiene products. We have a partnership with a nonprofit, Dignity Grows, to get those. Our campuses already do a really good job of having their finger on the pulse of what students need and adjusting their services accordingly. But Public Act 101 will make sure we do that because it requires us to do surveys on a biennial basis. The last thing I want to say before I overstay my welcome is SNAP. SNAP is a food insecurity strategy. We were so proud when Tunxus came on board and we had all 12 community colleges as SNAP employment and training providers. They're now all CT State campuses. That provides tuition and fee waivers for students who are SNAP recipients, along with participant expenses to address some of those barriers that are non-academic. So I have reached out to my counterpart at DSS. They fund the community action agencies across the state to do SNAP outreach. We certainly have taken the flyers, everything you've given us, and they are out there. But sometimes our students need more than that. And so I have met with the Connecticut Association for Community Action. They're going to get back to me about how we can partner with them. They have a contract to do outreach for SNAP. Their goal is to increase SNAP participation, and they've expressed a willingness to come to our campuses. I think that's really going to help students by meeting them where they're at. So I know Tam is here. I'm the ghost of Christmas past, and she represents the future of where we're going, but I'm here to answer any questions you have, and I'm thrilled that we're taking a look at these non-academic barriers.
We appreciate that. And
I'm not excited about it at all.
Well, I'm excited about the fact that you made that presentation briefly, because I'm now more aware of the kind of situations that we have students who can't get a breakfast or can't afford a breakfast, and we now have the opportunity to do it. And Stop and Shop is one of the biggest donors, and I think we need to let it be known that Stop and Shop does what they do for the students in the state of Connecticut. And it's an important thing. I'm not sure how we do it, whether we advertise it, but we ought to do something. And maybe, just maybe, we'll get others such as Stop and Shop to do that kind of donating so that the students that are going without a breakfast or a lunch will have that opportunity. Because I know you're gonna look at me, but you believe it. I was never good in the classroom when I was hungry. It's a question about whether I was good when I was not hungry, but definitely when I was hungry. And
An active debate behind your back on that point.
But I think it's important that the men and women have food, an opportunity to get food, and this program is a great one, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to at least make you make that brief presentation to those folks that are listening, and maybe we'll garner something else. And again, Stop and Shop, can't say enough thank you for them and what they do. Okay.
Charlene is good.
First of all, I wanted to thank Leslie and her team for her hard work. It sounds like, did you produce a written report also?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a draft, and we'll be sending it to all of the regions.
Okay, great. So, and then when you were describing it, there was discussion about a lot of work at the community colleges. It would be really great, even at the student orientations for across the system, when we bring new students in, even if there was a flyer or something included in that package that kind of went to all students as they enter, and that same level of information that the community colleges have, if the universities aren't leveraging it, really to bring that home as well, so that we can broaden the net of eligible students taking advantage of it. But thank you.
You see the report, you'll see that Central, for example, sends SNAP information to every enrolled student every semester. Perhaps that represents another benefit of coming together as a system, right? Is to see where are the best practices, who's doing what, and what is yielding fruit. They have chosen to do that. I know in talking to Steve McDowell, they have done that at times. They've been very open. They have a student holistic support survey that goes out every semester. So it goes out even farther, and it includes, for students that identify food insecurity, it includes outreach to those students beyond what's available generally. So I'm happy to continue to provide updates or whatever, or if there are questions when you receive the report, anything you need.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank
And
you.
can I say one last thing? The Student Success Council has already started engaging in this conversation about the ways and the communication measures that we are going to take as a system. All the vice presidents for student affairs and their teams have discussed ways that we are going to be sharing resources with students, whether it be through financial aid letters, whether it be through social media channels. There's Discord channels that students use on our campuses, Blackboard shells, all the different communication channels that we have with students. How do we express all of the resources that students use, including food insecurity, including our mental health resources, including our ADA supports on our campuses? We need to figure out, how do our students engage with those resources and how do we communicate those to our students? So we have a summit with that team in May, and we are going to be talking about the different avenues that currently the campuses are using them and try to streamline as a group to get those out better.
Thank you. Thanks for the comment. That being said, now I would move to make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made in the second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye,
Aye.
opposed. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all very much for your time and your input.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're very welcome. Thank you for doing it.
Your live stream is stopped.
Thank you, Pam.
Thanks, everybody.